We will introduce the BANG team, starting with the Secretary. Vary, please.
Hello everyone. Yes, I'm Vary Blowers, the Secretary of BANG. It's good to see so many of you here tonight and to put faces to names as well.
Thank you. Our Chairman, Andy Blowers.
Oh, good evening. Nice to see everybody. I hope we have a good meeting. Well, this is our fourth run through on this thing with the EA, so we shall be listening intently to see if things have changed much in the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Thank you. Committee member Sophie.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm committee member of BANG. I'm also a resident and councillor on West Mersey.
Judy.
I never think of myself as a committee member. I'm more just interested in learning more. But hello.
And Malden resident, Judy.
And chairman of Malden Society, yeah.
Fire away, Mr. Clark.
Good evening, everybody. I'm rather the backroom boy of the Mersey or BANG committee. I'm not seen very often.
Myself, my name is Peter Banks and I'm the BANG coordinator. Let's just have the introductions from our visiting team tonight, please. I'll hand over to Alan if you can kick the ball off there, please.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for the invitation tonight. Yeah, it's Al McGough. I'm the manager of the Reactor assessment team at the Environment Agency.
I'm Paul Ratkin. I'm the delivery lead for the generic design assessment.
And we've got Caroline.
Hi, I'm Caroline Richards and I do consultations, engagement and communications on nuclear regulation at the Environment Agency.
And lastly, we have Anna from the Office for Nuclear Regulation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ana Gomez, and I am head of HPR 1000 regulation at the Office for Nuclear Regulation, responsible for the generic design assessment of this reactor. We're going to hear about it tonight, and also for the licensing of Bradwell B. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So I'll hand over to Professor Andy Blowers just to give us a little bit of understanding of what we're trying to achieve tonight. Thank you, Andy.
Yes, thank you. And hello, everybody. And may I welcome colleagues who I know well from the Environment Agency. And it's very good of you to come along and subject yourself to a meeting which we're hosting rather than you. As I say, it's my fourth turn at this. And what we're hoping to do is I should just give a brief introduction and then I'll hand over to the Environment Agency for their presentation. And we're hoping that that will take no more than half an hour and give us a fair amount of time, we hope, for questions, answers and comments before we wind up at 9 o'clock. I think the intention is definitely to finish at 9 if we can. So if everybody can be fairly disciplined, that would be very helpful. BANG, as you know, has been very active on the Bradwell issue. I'm afraid to say it's for 13 years now. Maybe we're nearer the Holy Grail than we were back in 2009, or 2008 actually. The project itself, though, I want to say something about what's happened in the last year, because that brings us into the context for tonight. I would say the project, which was proceeding rather smoothly, and they said that they were ramping it up, began to falter once they entered the public arena at the beginning of last year, and with the coronavirus. Many of you here will realize or recognize that the company CGN partnership with EDF put forward their pre-application consultation about a year ago now, and it was met with incredible, powerful and strong opposition from all quarters. I think that must have been a bit of a shock to them, but the sheer scale of the proposal and what it implied in terms of the transformation of this whole region was the first major reverse, I would say, that the company had endured. So that went on, the consultation for that went on throughout the first half of last year. You, and no doubt others made responses. Similarly, at the same time, they were applying for further land investigations. And this is where Malden Council came in. Nice to see Kevin here tonight. After a discussion, it was absolutely amazing that Malden decided to reject the application for further land investigations, much against the common expectation, because Malden had gone along with the project for many, many years. And that reversal was backed up at Malden with an intention to oppose the project as a whole. That is an ongoing situation there. And maybe people want to mention it tonight, but it's not the key thing tonight. So that was, and the land investigation has gone to appeal, and the appeal has not yet been, appeal has been heard, but there is no result yet. Again, we're hanging on, wondering what is happening there. Now, and the other thing I should say is that the Colchester Borough Council, who we had been in communication with over all these years and who had on the whole been supportive, in the summer decided to make a resolution wholly against the proposal and supporting BANG. I should say I think that BANG has had a crucial role in Colchester's position against the project. At the national level, we've continued to work, particularly at the government level, stressing the point that this is not a suitable site for a nuclear power station. It's very, very difficult with the government in its present disarray and tending to support nuclear, but I think we have made some ingress there as well. So we come to the other area, which, and all those things have been reversals for the company. And so what's happened is at the beginning of this year, there was the sudden announcement that there was a pause. I call it a pause. They've now decided not to call it a pause, but a pause by any name would be as sweet. And I think what we see now is the company rowing back. And you can interpret that in many different ways. I choose to interpret it as a time for dithering. I think there's uncertainty there. And for a whole set of reasons, facing a whole set of obstacles, the company may not at this moment be incredibly desirous of pursuing its objective. So things have slowed up. And I think the power station is further away, but nonetheless, it has not gone away. And it's very important that we continue to press our opposition on all the grounds that we've been doing over the years and which you can read about on our website, etc. So we come to the generic design assessment, which is tonight's discussion. The Environment Agency and the Office for Nuclear Regulation, the ONR, together are regulators of the reactor and its impacts. I should say, when the deal was struck between President Xi Jinping and David Cameron back in 1915, the so-called golden relationship with China was born. And one of the objectives, a singular objective of that, was that the Chinese would be allowed to try and secure permission from the UK regulators for their reactor technology. And that was regarded as very important to them. It would give them a window on the West and the ability to flog their reactors across the world. And they were offered the opportunity and along with it, the Mersey site. And that's how we came in to facing a Chinese project. That, of course, is another problem behind the scenes as to how far the relationship with China has deteriorated since 2015, and whether that is a factor in the current pause. one can only speculate at this point. So the GDA has been proceeding, and it is arguable, I think, and maybe the regulators want to comment on this, that that's what it's all about now. That the company are still intent on getting a GDA. They may be less intent on securing a GDA and then planning permission to develop their reactors at Bradwell. Who knows? But anyway, the EA can speak for themselves. The last point I want to make is we are talking tonight, you recognize, about a generic process, a generic reactor and a generic site. This makes it very, very difficult in certain respects because of the limitations of this procedure for us to make pertinent points. I would just encourage people to listen to the EA and actually to fire full barrels afterwards for the concerns that they have about this particular reactor. This is a welcome opportunity. It's not the only opportunity we're going to get, but I think it's very important that the Environment Agency get a pretty good view of how people in the Blackwater communities are feeling. Thank you, Peter. And can I hand over now perhaps to Alan?
Okay, thanks very much, Andy, for the introduction. And I'm sorry you're going to have to sit through our presentation again. I think you must be starting to enjoy it. I did find myself thinking tonight, have I worn that shirt before? But we've cut it down a bit, the presentation. I suppose the alternative would have been to give it over to you, Peter, to present it, because you probably know word for word, but we'll do our best to say and pass over the same information. Maybe we could bring the presentation up. Okay, we're on the second page, but that's all right. We'll go for there. So it'll be myself and then Paula who presents tonight, as we've done before. So we'll just talk first of all about the purpose of this session from our perspective, about who's involved in generic design assessment, a brief summary of the process that we use in generic design assessment, a bit on our consultation, which is ongoing and we're here to talk about tonight. Paula will talk about our assessment and outcomes and how to respond to our consultation and the next steps that we'll be taking. Okay. So just the purpose of this meeting, and these are this presentation we've been giving it when we've been hosts. So it's only right to give you the same information as others. So this meeting is to help inform you about our work on generic design assessment of General Nuclear System Limited's UK HPR 1000 nuclear reactor. We want to listen to your comments and answer your questions where we can. And we want to invite you to respond to our consultation, which is open until the 4th of April. And we'll talk later on about how to respond. Perhaps first thing to say is what's GDA about? Generic Design Assessment is about an early assessment and an assessment which begins early of reactor designs. Basically, what you would be building at every station if you were to build. What does GDA let you do? And the answer is not a lot. What it enables regulators to do is provide early advice on the issues and concerns and any needs for change so as to meet UK expectations. But a developer proposing to construct and operate a UK HPR 1000 at a site in the UK still needs to obtain all the necessary site-specific regulatory permissions and permits and licenses and consents that they would do normally. So GDA doesn't let you do anything. What it does do, hopefully, from a developer's perspective, is to put them in a better position when they apply, because the design should be consistent with UK expectations. Okay. So who's involved in this work? Well, there's ourselves, the Environment Agency is the environmental regulator in England. There's the Office for Nuclear Regulation, who are our nuclear safety security regulator. There's General Nuclear System Limited, GNSL, who are the requesting party, and it's worth saying at this stage as well. And Andy alluded to it in his introduction. The the Environment Agency and the Office for Nuclear Regulation, we don't decide which reactors come into generic design assessment, because that's a commercial and strategic decision, which isn't for us, it's for government. And so it's government who approaches, it's the Secretary of State or the ministers at BASE who approach the Environment Agency and ONR to request that a particular design is put through generic design assessment. Okay. So a bit about the Environment Agency. We have about 10,000 employees, of which somewhere around about probably 100 regulate nuclear sites. Our headline is we protect and improve the environment. The Environment Agency regulates industry, including nuclear sites. We regulate the use of radioactive substances and disposals of radioactive waste. And on nuclear sites, it's disposal of radioactive waste, as well as other matters such as the operation of combustion plant and discharges into the water environment. So combustion plant is usually standby diesel or gas turbine generators. And discharges into the water environment is usually processed waters and turbine condenser cooling water from nuclear sites. The Environment Agency, we don't regulate nuclear safety, security, or transport of radioactive materials. That's for our colleagues in the Office for Nuclear Regulation. We are an advisor in the planning process, so we provide advice to planning authorities, which is local authorities, for example, or PINs in the nuclear site development consent order process, for them to provide recommendations to the Secretary of State, who's a decision maker, of course, and they can consider that in their decision making, the advice that we provide. We've included this graphic just to set out what we do as regulators. Is available on our website, so we'll move on and try and keep to our timescale. And it's another graphic which also sets out what we do in generic design assessment. It's 4 steps in essence of increasingly detailed scrutiny of a reactor design. Okay, Anna.
Thank you, Alan. So the Office of Nuclear Regulation is an independent statutory body, and it was formed in April 2014 on the commencement of the Energy Act 2013. But of course, we exist a long time before that. So before 2014, we were an agency of the Health and Safety Executive, but in fact, we began as Nuclear Installations Inspectorate back in 1960. So we regulate civil nuclear activity plus some aspects of defense activity across Great Britain. And we work very closely with other regulators. And as Alan said earlier, actually, Andy said earlier, the generic design assessment is a joint project between the Environment Agency and ourselves. So on the right-hand side of the slide, what you have is our purposes. So ONR regulates nuclear safety, nuclear site health and safety or conventional health and safety, nuclear security, nuclear safeguards, and the transport of radioactive materials. Now, it's important to clarify that in GDA, we don't cover the 5 of them. We cover nuclear safety, nuclear site health and safety, and nuclear security, but not safeguards and not transport. This is a little bit busy, but I like to show it because it shows you our mission, which is to protect society by securing safe nuclear operations. Then our vision, below that you have our values, and then what you have is our 4 strategic themes. And in all our daily work, we operate using this framework. And I want to bring your attention to the 2nd strategic theme, which is inspiring stakeholder confidence. Our regulation is as open and as transparent as we possibly can. And we come to events like this just to make sure you can ask us questions and you gain confidence in the way we deliver our regulatory duties. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is a screen shot of our website, and what you have there is listed and on the map the sites we regulate. So we regulate 36 nuclear license sites, and we also have regulatory functions, regulatory powers in other sites, and you have them all listed there. And I think the slides will be available for everyone. So you want to know more about those, you can access from that. Of course, as well as this, we have the new build activity, so before the site gets the license. And in there, we cover the generic design assessment work, licensing of nuclear installations, and also the work. We do quite a bit of work on advanced nuclear technologies like small modular reactors.
Regulation. So thanks, what we've set here, introduction to the Office for Nuclear Regulation. So what we've set here is a sort of shorthand version of the generic design assessment process. I think many people have probably seen it before. So up along the top line there, we have ONR's GDA process, and we work closely together. It's a joint project. With its 4 steps, increasingly more detailed scrutiny, beginning with the setup, as it does for the Environment Agency in step 1. That's about getting ready for generic design assessment, because it is a really robust and thorough process. Step 2, which for the Environment Agency is an initial assessment, where we look to see if there's anything which is obviously unacceptable in the UK, and we make sure that the right management systems and approaches are embedded in the company. And then we move on to steps 3 and 4, which is combined. For ONR, it's 2 separate steps. And in our step 3, we carry out our detailed assessment. That's where we are at the moment. And as part of that, we have our consultation, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. If the generic design assessment gets to the end there, then the regulators have decisions about what they should do, and we'll cover it next. But in essence, for ONR, is should it issue a DAC, which is a design acceptance confirmation, and for the EA, whether we should issue a statement of design acceptability. Also worth saying that as well as the consultation, of course, there's other openness and transparency measures that we require companies to put in place. And that includes a question process, which runs right along the GDA process from step 2, when they're ready to implement it, to quite close to the end of step 3, 4 for us. And would cease a few months beforehand. There are links into the between the generic design assessment process and our permitting process. If a developer decides to bring forward applications for operational environmental permits to operate a site, then that's the process set out there. It includes pre-application advice, the developer making an application. We consult in that application. We assess the response to the application itself in response to the consultation. We decide what our proposed decision should be, and we consult in that. And then, having consulted on it, we will make our final decision as to whether a permit should be issued, and if so, what its terms and conditions should be, so as to properly protect the environment. And there are links between the GDA process and stages of the permitting process. There are also links between the permitting process and the planning process, which is at the bottom of the slide there, and involves, of course, PINs, the Planning Inspectorate, making recommendations to the Secretary of State. These are the outcomes from GDA that's possible on the left-hand side there. If we are not content with the design, then we would not issue a design acceptance confirmation or a statement of design acceptability. If we are, then we would consider issuing those. There's a middle ground, which is where we've carried out our assessments. However, there's still issues to be resolved. It's for the requesting party, the party which is asked for the GDA, in this case GNSL, then to set out resolution plans. We have to assess them. those resolution plans. And if we consider them credible, we will consider issuing an interim DAC and an interim SODA. Clearly, if having issued an interim DAC and SODA, the requesting party then successfully implements, that's to our satisfaction, those resolution plans resolving the issues, then we can move to issuing a full DAC and SODA on the right-hand side. And that middle ground is sort of where we are with this consultation at the moment. We've carried out our assessments. They are still ongoing, as we indicated before. However, we have got 6 potential GDA issues to be resolved by the requesting party before we would consider issuing a DAC and SODA at this stage. And of course, new issues could come up as we complete our assessments. Okay. A bit about our consultation. We are working to engage people, recognising the difficult situation that we are in at the moment due to coronavirus restrictions, which we must all comply with. So we are holding events, virtual events for both natural and local stakeholders, and I'm pleased to say we're able to attend your event tonight. We're probably participating in more events than what we would have done if we'd been able to do them face-to-face. It would have been good to do them face-to-face. We are quite regular at coming down and seeing Andy and Peter and Barry and colleagues on a 6-monthly basis up to coronavirus. We've been advertising in local newspapers. We've done it in print and digital formats. And there are non-digital options whereby people can engage with us, and that includes telephone appointments. And we do have hard copy documents if people would like them. And we're happy to send them to you. And we're also raising awareness via regular communication channels. For example, we've made sure it's mentioned at BASI's NGO forum so that people were aware of our consultation. The plan for that engagement is set out there in that website. Or that link, and these slides are available, so if anybody wants to follow it, please do. It's on doug.gov.uk. Okay. Our consultation documents, this is a technical consultation. These are technical assessments, invariably. However, we have produced a summary document which includes non-technical information on how to respond. There's a much more comprehensive consultation document, which is here. These are the hard copies, in fact, one of the hard copies, which sets out the process and summarises our assessments. We have 8 detailed assessment technical reports, and there's also an independent dose assessment, and they're all to be found in that link there. The requesting parties information, one of the requirements of GDA is that they provide information on a website that they set up, the information which we are assessing, and that's provided at that link, not commercial information and not security sensitive information for obvious reasons. Okay. Okay, so just a little bit in the scope of the consultation. So in generic design assessment, we assess the environmental protection aspects of a new nuclear power station design, including its potential environmental impacts. Those impacts are not related to a specific site, but to a generic site as specified by the requesting party. And to be clear, that generic site that was specified for the UK HPR 1000 is based on once through turbine condenser cooling. It's not based on a hybrid cooling tower based system. That was chosen by the requesting party at the time. In terms of direct through, any changes from GDA would in any case be picked up in the site specific stage if applications are made. And it's also clear that this, in terms of scope of consultation, it's not about government energy policy, because clearly that's for government. It's not about site-specific environmental impacts, because that would be dealt with fully at the site-specific stage. It can't be about planning aspects such as visual impacts or transport, because that's for the Planning Inspectorate, Secretary of State. And it's not about safety, security, or transportation of radioactive materials, because that's for our colleagues in the Office for Nuclear Regulation. Okay. And a couple of our assumptions. The second one I've mentioned before, the generic site uses ones through seawater cooling for the turbine condenser. This is consistent with government policy in terms of management of radioactive wastes. So fuel will not be reprocessed. It'll be a once through cycle, and spent fuel will go to a geological disposal facility, a GDF, as will higher activity wastes. Paula.
All right, thanks, Alan. What I wanted to actually do in terms of the technical stuff is just to describe to you the 8 topics that we do and what we actually look at and the outcomes from that. So, as Alan mentioned, there are 8 topics. So the first one is management systems and quality assurance. So this is looking at the control of documentation and design and the fitness of the organisation to deliver the generic design assessment. It also looks at how information is transferred forward to the operator. The second topic is strategic waste management. So this is looking at the overall radioactive waste management arrangements in line with government policy and UK national waste handling infrastructure. The third topic is best available techniques, and this is looking at how the design features are optimised for environmental protection. So that's quite a large topic report, but all the key controls are documented in there. We look at discharges to air and water in terms of the estimated discharges and what limits are applicable in terms of permitting. We also look at how those compare with worldwide pressurised water reactors. We look at solid waste, spent fuel and disposability in terms of waste avoidance, minimisation, and how impact on the environment is reduced, and also how the waste is managed so it doesn't prejudice disposability. We look at sampling and monitoring, so that's in-process monitoring and monitoring of discharges to comply with a permit, but we cannot look at environmental monitoring at generic design assessment because environmental monitoring very much depends on what's around the site. We do look at what the generic site consists of and the radiological impact for that generic site. That allows us to roughly compare what we're expecting in terms of constraints and limits for dose, but it also highlights where the impact is coming from and allows us to target our scrutiny of the design. Topics 2 to 7 are very much focused on radioactivity and radioactive waste, but there are many, many other environmental regulations. So we do look at the other environmental regulations at a fairly high level. So these would be water discharge activities for non-radioactivity, combustion permits for the diesel generators, and various other things such as water abstraction. So it's a very, very brief outline. If you've got specific questions, we can answer those. In the consultation document and reports, you will find 2 measures of outcome. So one is a potential GDA issue and one is an assessment finding. And I just wanted to clarify what those are. So a potential GDA issue is a matter that we have identified that needs to be resolved by the end of the GDA. And if it wasn't, it would mean we would only be able to issue an interim statement of design acceptability. You will also see in the reports assessment findings, and these relate to matters that we've identified at GDA that require addressing, but they can only be done at the site-specific stage. So it's where an assessment has gone so far but couldn't go any further because it requires information. So these are carried forward and they are addressed by a future operator at the site-specific stage. So that's the difference between the 2 measures you'll see in the documents. In pre-meetings with yourselves and other groups, you've been asked about what is the generic site. So to quickly outline that, it has to be a representative site that is defined by the requesting party to allow us to assess the impacts. And the things we're after are the position of the reactor in the environment around it. It has to match UK applicable sites. Environmental parameters such as meteorological conditions and water dispersion that allows us to model environmental movement. We want information on the distance to the nearest occupied buildings and centres of population and the habits of the local people. So just to clarify, what has been chosen is that we will have a coastal or estuarine site with flat land around it. The dispersion parameters will be selected as the lowest from the existing UK sites, which in this case does happen to be Bradwell. The distance to the nearest occupied building is 100 metres from the site, and crop production is 500 metres from the site. So it really is a worst case scenario in terms of exposure. The habits of the local people is taken from generic published data, which has been around quite a while, but around nuclear sites, there are regular habit surveys carried out on consumption rates of food. And the requesting party has looked at the generic data and looked at the Bradwell data and chosen the most conservative of the two. So we've got a hybrid site that has some characteristics of Bradwell, but is not totally Bradwell. The other thing we were asked to put in context was what the dose impact is from radioactivity, because that's the one thing we can assess at GDA quite well. So the dose assessment and our independent dose assessment is in pretty good agreement, but the worst case total highest dose to a member of the public will be between 10 and 23 microsieverts per year. The 10 is for an infant, the 23 is for an adult, and it would be essentially someone with quite large local fish eating habits. And just to put that in context, I've pulled some information from a government website on other doses. So 10 microsieverts is equivalent to a bag of Brazil nuts, and 14 microsieverts is a chest x-ray. Just living in the UK, you'll get 2,700 microsieverts per year on average, although in some areas it's considerably higher where you have granitic bedrock. So that was just to set that in context. Alan alluded earlier that we have 6 potential GDA issues identified, and I just wanted to quickly run through those and provide you with an update on where we are with those. So the first one is management systems and quality assurance that related to a lack of consistency of choosing and using operational experience as evidence. That was captured under Regulatory Observation 44, which is available on the ONR GDA website. That is progressing and is going to be closed in the next month. We have 2 issues identified for as part of the best available techniques study. One is purely a divergence between ONR and EA processes, so that we have a backed case that talks about how the design protects the environment, but the parallel ALARP case, which is an ONR measure of risk, has not yet been agreed, and that leads to a risk that designs could be reopened for evaluation. So we just want appropriate balance of BAT and ALARP to be maintained throughout the remainder of GDA. We haven't had to open any redesigns yet, so that's quite, that issue will go away just naturally. The third issue relates to the HEPA filter choice. So these are the filters that go on the heating, ventilation and air conditioning system. In the UK, there is a clear preference for a cylindrical type of HEPA filter and the characteristics that go with that. This design has chosen a rectangular HEPA filter type. It doesn't mean that's a wrong choice, it just means it needs to be explained and justified why that's the right choice. And we felt there was a lot of information lacking about why that choice was made. So that's captured under Regulatory Observation 36, and that is now ready for closure because the information has been provided. The last 3 issues are identified in the solid waste, spent fuel and disposability assessment report. So the first one was that the spent fuel interim store, so this is the interim store before spent fuel goes to a geological disposal facility, was defined conceptually using international best practice, but it wasn't linked to the actual requirements stipulated by the fuel manufacturer. And that's purely because it wasn't available at the time we've gone to consultation. That has since been provided and is being assessed now. The 5th issue related to the management strategy for disposal of in-core instrumentation assemblies. There was a challenge on the safety of the retrieval process, which meant the waste strategy may have to be redefined. That was captured under Regulatory Observation 37. That has since been accepted that they can be retrieved and disposed of safely. And the final potential GDA issue was relating to reassurance that needs to be provided from the radioactive waste management company that the higher activity waste is suitable for acceptance into a future geological disposal facility. So RWM are the people who would define what goes in a future GDF. That information has actually been provided today. So we are looking at that now. So overall, we have had 6 identified issues that require closure before the end of GDA. So we are consulting on an ISODA, an interim statement of design acceptability. However, it's clearly stated in the consultation document that work is ongoing to resolve these issues. And if the issues are resolved by the end of GDA and no other issues arise, that we could actually consider issuing a SODA, or a full statement of design acceptability. We've identified also 40 assessment findings, which will go further forward to a future operator to address. So that's a romp through the actual findings. There are 3 ways to respond to the consultation. These are documented in most of the adverts you'll have seen and the documents themselves. By far the easiest way is to use the e-consultation tool. However, you can also respond by email direct to our nuclear inbox at nuclear@environmentagency.gov.uk. Or for those that aren't available to digital technology, they can write a letter to me at our Penrith office. So what happens next? Well, at the end of the consultation, we will record, carefully consider and respond to all our comments in the decision document. We do look at the comments and check that we have addressed all the concerns that we can realistically do at generic design assessment. However, between the end of the consultation and the decision document being released, there's quite a gap. So in May, straight after the consultation, we will publish a document of all the responses that we receive, so everybody gets to see the range of responses. And the actual addressing of the responses will be covered in our decision document, and I'm currently targeting early 2022 for the publication of that one. So I think that brings us to the end. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand you back to, probably in this case, Peter.
Thank you, Paula, Anna and Alan. And let's see if we can get back to a gallery view so that we can see everybody. And I know that there was quite a lot to take in for people that haven't already experienced that presentation. There are opportunities now to ask a question, and we'll be able to refer to the 2 teams represented here. And within the chat function, you can ask a question, or you can actually raise your hand under the reactions button. There's a raise hand function there. Or, although I cannot see everybody all the time, I will keep tabs on actual physical hand waving. So let's have a look at the first question, which has come in on the chat from Kerry. How many generic designs have been assessed by the UK regulators so far in the history, and how many of these have been denied or accepted? Thank you, Kaori. Who would like to kick off on that one, please?
Sure, I can respond to that, Peter, thanks. So generic design assessment started back in 2006-07. We looked at 4 designs, of which 2 decided to drop out of the process, and taken through to IDAC and ISODA, where the UK EPR, which is the design which is under construction at Hinkley and is proposed for Sizewell, and the Westinghouse AP1000. Subsequent to the issue of the IDAC and the ISODA for both of those designs, the UK EPR first carried on resolving the issues, and we were able to issue them with a full IDAC and SODA. Westinghouse was delayed. They did pause for a while and then came back. They successfully resolved the issue to our satisfaction. I think there was 32 issues and 52 respectively, if I remember right, in total, ONR and EA. And then there was the ABWR, which is the UK ABWR, which is the Advanced Boil and Water Reactor, which came from Hitachi. Sorry, Anna?
No, it's okay. I'm losing the sound, so I just getting cut all the time, but it's okay.
Okay, so the Advanced Boil and Water Reactor, which came from Hitachi, and it completed the GDA process fully, and didn't go through an IDAC and ISODA stage. It was proposed for both in youth up in Anglesey in Wales, but of course Hitachi's withdrawn from that. And the fourth design is the one we're talking about tonight, the UK HPR 1000. So in summary, 3 designs have gone through the process. There were a lot of issues, as you'd expect in terms of making sure it's suitable for the UK and our approach to regulation. These were addressed and they were successful in getting their DAC and soda.
Thank you. I can see Mr. Brooke, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute and ask your question, please?
Thank you, Peter. I'm particularly interested in the environmental assessment outcomes about discharges to air and water. I note that the generic design assessment specifies the use of seawater for cooling. The old Bradwell Magnox power station also used seawater for cooling. And the big issue with seawater is marine growth, algal, fish, mollusks, crustaceans, all kinds of growth on piping and plant, which affects the flow of cooling water. The old Magnox system in the days before we cared what we did to the environment used to chlorinate the water and chemically treat an enormous quantity of seawater in the estuary. The local fishermen have witnessed the fact that at least half a mile either side of the barrage that diffused the water, there was an underwater marine desert where the discharged cooling water had killed off all marine life. Now, the generic design here is a much bigger, much more powerful station that will require a lot more cooling water. And I'm interested to know how such cooling water would be treated and maintain the existing quality of the environment.
Okay, perhaps I'll tackle that one first. So that's right. The old Bradwell A, I used to be site inspector, and it used once through turbine condenser cooling. And in terms of how those algal growths and marine growths are treated, it depends from site to site. Some sites it's not necessary, some sites it is. And in the particular case of Bradwell B, their proposal at the moment is to use considerably less water than what would otherwise be required, because they really do, use huge amounts of water when you get to a big station like, say, Sizewell B. 45 tons of seawater per second is what's used for turbine condensing. But the company at the moment, its proposals, as you have seen previously, were to use these big pancake cooling towers. Those reduce the water demand significantly. You do need to top up water because the basis of their operation, of course, is evaporative cooling. And you do need to keep the salinity down in the tank, effectively, as seawater, because salt will concentrate up. What the proposals were, or what the proposals are for Bradwell B in terms of chlorination or other treatment, I don't know offhand, off the top of my head. In generic design assessment, because it really is environment specific, we don't necessarily look at that. I don't know whether you want to add anything, Paula?
Yeah, in topic assessment report number 8, there is some very, very high level consideration of biocide usage in the cooling water, but it does assume once through seawater cooling. So what is assumed at this generic design assessment wouldn't be the same as what would be proposed for Bradwell B. I don't know what that will be yet. But the high level assessment is for a completely different cooling system. So I don't think it would actually be applicable even if you were to read that assessment report.
But what we can say is that if proposals come forward and applications are made, then it would be considered as in terms of the impact on the environment of using chlorination or other treatment of the turbine condenser. Well, it would be the cooling tower system water.
So if I might just come back on that, if it were to be the cooling tower system, as you rightly say, that the principle is based on evaporation, and we all know that cooling towers do have plumes of evaporated or moist air coming off the top of them. I happen to be looking out a window to my right and looking straight at where the cooling towers would be, only 2-3 kilometres away across open sea or the estuary. Has there been any environmental scientific study as to how the atmosphere because we're directly downwind, we are directly down south or southwest of the prevailing breezes from the new cooling tower installation proposal, and I'd like to know how the atmosphere here would be affected by this continuous plume of evaporated and moist air.
And I think that's something which would have to be assessed at the site-specific stage. Alan, we haven't assessed it in generic design assessment. I mean, cooling towers are fairly common, as you know. In terms of visible plume, you can get towers which reduce any visible plume considerably. They tend to be, and also lower than the really quite tall cooling towers that you used to see beside conventional power stations. I mean, pretty much that side of it, from the turbines down through the generator to the turbine condenser, that side is pretty much the same for any power station in terms of a steam turbine that drives a generator with a condenser being cooled in some way in evaporative or direct cooling being used. So we haven't looked at it in GDA, but I guess it would be part of considering the site-specific stage.
Thank you very much. Glad to see you spell your name the right way too. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Alan's. Yeah, I think it's important to point out this is not whilst the hybrid cooling towers is not a GDA item, it is odd that would not be assessed until the site-specific function kicked in, because it's not used in the UK, is it, on a nuclear power station?
Cooling tower options were used. They were used in 2 nuclear power stations. The very first one at Calder Hall, up adjacent to Sellafield, and also at Chapel Cross. I remember fondly when I used to get the train past or drive up the 74, you could see Chapel Cross and its 4 cooling towers there. So yeah, they have been used on nuclear. But the great preference, of course, is to use direct cooling because it's more efficient. Yeah. Cooling towers require, especially for forced draft, to use more energy. They are less efficient. So if a developer is building a power station to get the maximum amount of electricity out of the process, they will always seek direct cooling if they can.
So you can confirm that the cooling towers used at those 2 stations, Chapel Cross, were hybrid cooling towers?
I don't know if they were hybrid, but they were certainly cooling towers, yeah.
I think I can confirm for you, Alan, for your knowledge base, that they were not hybrid cooling towers. Andy, did you want to come back on any of those points so far?
kind of you to comment. I thought Alan Brooks' question was a very interesting one and demonstrates the problem with this whole GDA, which is that there's so little you can really comment on because it's either going to be at the site-specific stage or it's somebody else's responsibility. And clearly the cooling system is a major issue. And we can't make any useful comment on it except to say that it is a problem, both in terms of the generation itself, in terms of the aesthetics, etc. I just wanted to make a general comment really that arises from this, which is the whole nature of the GDA process that the EA are putting forward is in a sense to go for detail and do a lot of work on very detailed aspects. Now, their job is to protect the environment and human communities and public health. And you would have thought at first base that they would have a comment to make on the project as a whole. I mean, this project invades the total environment. It brings danger and environmental destruction to a substantial area of the Dengie Peninsula and the Blackwater Estuary. And yet the EA is silent on this. I mean, this can hardly be regarded as environmental protection if it's prepared to let the thing go. And what they'll say to us is, and no doubt are about to say to us is, well, actually, the site has already been decided. It's not our responsibility, and it is seen as a potentially suitable site. My response to that is this is nonsense. It seems to me there's no reason whatsoever why the Environment Agency should not make a comment on the project as a whole and its destructive nature. That is the be-all and end-all of the public's concern about this project. And things about filters, whether they're triangular or oblong and so on, may be interested to the purists, but I mean, it's hardly a major issue. And on the radioactive waste issue, they're just going to accept letters from RWM, who don't really know what they can do at this stage, to say, okay, your spent fuel management is okay, it's hunky-dory, is not a problem. The assumptions are willfully almost underplayed. And I personally think that the Environment Agency could be regarded as, in terms of a dereliction of its duties, in not protecting the environment properly.
Thank you, Andy. Right, we've got.
Shall I respond to that? I think it should. We're not derelict in our duty,
please, because we've got quite a few questions that are really like to get asked. Are you pausing?
Yep.
Thank you. Right, Judy, you've got a couple of questions. Please, would you fire away and ask them? Thank you.
Sorry.
You were unmuted for a second and then you immediately muted.
Apologies. One quick one is I'm not clear whether in the generic site noise is taken into consideration, because I know there are people who are even concerned with the noise made from small little wind generators. Is the measurement of sound done? And of course that harks back again to the cooling towers, because I understand they are fan cooled perhaps. So is noise a consideration? And then the other question related to, I was picking up that the crops within 500 metres are mentioned. Presumably that's looking landward. Of course, in an estuarine generic situation, there might well be oysters and fish. How is that crop dealt with? And with the habits of local people, does that include boating, swimming and walking, which goes on a lot around here? So I'd want to be sure that was covered as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. I'll come to you in a second, Paula. I think I can address that you were asking issues about noise, and I can address Andy's point as well, and that is to say that it's not a dereliction of duty by the Environment Agency to do generic design assessment and to do it properly, because that's in essence what you would build on, or what a developer would build on any site. But there will be changes according to the nature of the site. And it's really important to pick up that what we do, what we are the decision makers on, is environmental permits. So our job is to receive applications on those and to make decisions about them as to their acceptability. There are many other aspects of environmental impact of any development, nuclear or not, which are outside our decision making, but on which we do provide advice. And that would include impact, for example, in biodiversity. It would include impact on habitats regulations, protected species, whole series of things that we would provide advice on, but we recognise we are not the decision maker. That is for others to take into account. Noise would be, I think, part of the planning permission considerations, because there would be wider aspects. So it's not a dereliction of duty to say that we address the matters which are important to us and make decisions about them, but equally we shouldn't be taking responsibility for things that we do not control, and things like noise would be for planning inspectorate to make recommendation to the Secretary of State and to consider the wider impact on people of things like noise, or transport, or impact in health infrastructure, or housing, and all of those, or tourism. Those matters are part of the planning process. They're certainly not in generic design assessment. But you were asking questions that are directly related to GDA. So if I can pass to Paula, there was questions about habits surveys, Paula.
Okay, so your first question was the crop distance was 500 metres, and you were wondering about other aspects. Well, fish and shellfish are considered as part of the consumption, and they are assumed to be local to the outfall. So yes, the shellfish and fish pathway is considered. And the other one was you're asking, does habits include boating and walking? Yes, when you do a dose assessment, there is a measure of how much time is spent indoors and outdoors, and how much time is spent around intertidal sediments, and that's based on surveys that and the data that's published. So yes, that is also considered as part of the GDA impact assessment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paula.
I've got a few people lined up now, but I've noticed that Tim Oxton has asked a related question, had that question already. Tim, do you want to quickly spin through that? I appreciate that the emphasis of your question is different to what was just asked, but as we're on the 500 metres point, perhaps you would just squeeze your question in now, please.
Yes, okay. I'm concerned about what happens in the event of a major disaster of the type of Chernobyl or Fukushima. Now, there, they had to ban from consumption crops produced thousands of kilometers away from the site. Certainly in the case of Chernobyl. I think in the case of Fukushima, maybe the radius of danger wasn't quite so great. But what really concerns me is what happens in the event of a major disaster, unlikely though that may be. Unlikely does not mean impossible. That's all. Thank you.
Anna,
that is for me, Alan.
Yes, thanks, Anna.
So I think it's important to explain that the risk assessment is something that is prepared by the requesting party, and we assess it quite thoroughly in GDA. And in this is a comprehensive risk assessment in which it identifies everything that can start an accidental sequence, how these accidents can can progress, and what can happen to the plant. Eventually you can have a core melt, and if things go worse than that, then you could have radioactive releases to the environment, which is what it could cause. There are consequences for people. So all this is evaluated in the GDA, and we do have a very numerical targets for the risk to people from accidents from the site. And those targets, those risk figures are quite low, and not only that. So the duty of in the future, it will be the licensee is to demonstrate that the risk has been reduced as low as reasonably practicable. So in GDA, we look at all the design aspects to make sure that all the improvements that are reasonably practicable have been put in the design. So we do have an understanding in GDA of what could go wrong and what would be the risk to the public, but those figures are quite low, and we make sure that they are underpinned by evidence. So obviously, if there is an accident like the Chernobyl cannot happen in this nuclear power plant, is a completely different type of reactor, and that type of sequence, which was pretty bad and pretty catastrophic, as we all know, cannot happen in this nuclear power plant. But there are accidental sequences that can happen that would create releases, that could affect the public. But we look at that, and we also look at practical elimination in GDA, which means that those accidental sequences that can have large early releases are these are really designed out, and we look at all that in the GDA to make sure that the risk from this reactor is as low as reasonably practicable and quite low. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but what I've explained.
You've done your best to answer my question, but I'm afraid I'm not convinced. The key question for me is, why have we not had a nuclear power station built in the middle of London? For example, on the riverside, directly opposite the Houses of Parliament. There you've got plenty of water for cooling, and since nuclear power stations are so safe, why not save all the cost of transmission of electricity along power lines across 50, 100 miles of countryside? The whole thing would be a lot cheaper, yes, and perfectly safe.
I'm going to come in there and move on to some other folk.
So can we? I think Alan, maybe. Sorry, Peter. Maybe Alan, we need to say something about the siting, which is.
Yeah, I mean, government has a siting policy in the shape of the national policy statement, and as Andy predicted, we'll mention that it identifies 8 potentially suitable sites. Or for reactors, that policy statement was for designs which could be deployed by 2025. And what we've heard from government is that it is reviewing that policy statement at the moment. So in terms of siting, it's through the national policy statement. That policy statement there is to help inform the planning process. There was one other thing that I wanted to clarify, I think, Tim, and just reading your question, I read it again there. We're not saying that it's safe to grow crops at 500 meters, implying that it's unsafe, in less than 500 meters. What we're saying is we assumed that there was crops at 500 meters when we did our radiological assessment. And what we are doing a radiological assessment for, very clearly, is normal operation, because it's obvious by definition we wouldn't permit an accident. That's not the way it works. The Environment Agency is dealing with normal operation. Sorry, Peter, I thought just wanted to clarify that.
No, I'm so keen to get the other questions in. However, while I've got the floor, there was actually a nuclear reactor in the middle of London, and if you want to know more about it, I will tell you. Kevin, please.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Thanks, Anna, Alan, and Paula, because I found the presentation very informative. And I've got more worries now than I had before I joined the forum. Just a couple of observations, if I may, and also just a question. Really, when the question is about, you mentioned earlier on about the processes to look at the design application to meet UK expectations. So I'd be really grateful if you can point me into the location where I can find that detail, so we can find out what the UK expectations actually are. That was mentioned earlier on in your presentation. It worries me about the GDA as well, because when you're talking about the two different cooling mechanisms, and you're talking about one on an estuary and one on a sort of sea frontage, I can't see how you can have a generic design that could be dropped into either of those. And I will talk specifically about Bradwell, because it's the elephant in the room for me. It just doesn't work, because you talk about what Andy said earlier on. You know, one of the key functions, Alan, you said about the EA was protect and improve the environment. That's a big conversation to have when we're talking about something as destructive as this. You can't mitigate against destruction. We mentioned that the sea life and the flora and the fauna. So there's lots of areas that I'm concerned about. And ALARP, just to sort of to talk about that, Hannah, I get what you say, but it's also, again, as a risk professional, applying that type of technology and methodology into a nuclear site design, reasonably practicable, that also gives me a degree of concern. But really, if you could point me in the direction of where I can find what the UK expectations are for nuclear design, I'd be very grateful.
Okay. Both ONR and ourselves have produced guidance for the GDA process, and also on how we regulate and what our requirements are. It covers, for example, our radioactive substances regulation environmental principles, and the safety assessment principles, and I'm sure Anna will want to add in a minute. Our requirements are on our websites. There's quite extensive guidance available. We update that guidance from time to time. We have produced a new GDA process, updated most recently, which reflects that we now have each of 3 steps totally aligned, ONR and EA. And that's based in learning and what we think we can do. Ours still includes a consultation where a requesting party is looking for a DAC and a soda. So our websites would be the relevant place. I'm sure we can send you the links.
Great.
Anna, did you want to come in?
Yes, very quickly, because I will have taken note to send you the links. But ONR has published GDA technical guidance, which for each technical discipline we give very specific expectations for the GDA, and also learning lessons from the previous GDAs. We obviously have our published safety assessment principles that cover the whole range of technical aspects, and we use them as our main principles in GDA. Underneath that, we have very much more detailed technical assessment guides, and we have one on probabilistic safety analysis, which is quite detailed, and is the one we use to assess this risk assessment that the requesting party has been put in front of us. And you talked about the reasonably practicable analysis, and what we have is a technical assessment guide on ALARP as well as reasonably practicable, and we also have risk-informed decision-making guidance. So I'll provide all these links because those are the guidance and the principles we use to assess the proposals for this design and the documentation sent to us by the requesting party.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's also worth mentioning, the basic principles of radiological protection, which aren't just about imposing limits on the doses, the radiation doses that people can be exposed to, members of the public and indeed workers can be exposed to, but they're also a requirement that those doses should be as low as reasonably achievable. And that means that for an operator, it's really necessary to think at each step how the dose can be reduced, for example, by reducing the level of discharges, by treating discharges. It does take into account economic and social aspects as well. But in general, as Paula spoke about earlier, the actual dose to the most exposed group of people as we assess it is low, low by comparison with the discharge limit, dose limit, the public dose limit, and low with respect to the background radiation, which you see in the UK. And those assessments are done assuming that discharges are 100% of the limits which we've identified. But then that ALARA principle, as low as reasonably achievable, we require the use of the best available techniques to deliver doses being as low as reasonably achievable. That comes in and reduces doses further, so it's squashed down further. It's the system that we use, the regulatory approach we use in the UK really does help to say it's more than just achieving limits, it's about minimising impacts. That's really important to us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Right, I've got two people that I'd love to get in before 9 o'clock, which is going to be a squeeze. And then if people are content and if our guests, contributors are willing to stay on for a few minutes, we could press on to make sure we cover some of the other questions. David, please.
Yes, my question is, as part of the generic design assessment, who and how is the cybersecurity risk assessment conducted against internal or external threat actors? And that's in the context of of three things. Firstly, the 2010 Stuxnet attack on the Iranian centrifuges, which took out a fifth of their infrastructure. The second one is the January 2020 decision by Her Majesty's government to say that while we would be limited to 35% of the broadband and 5G network in the UK because of the perceived risks, which was then reduced in July down to 0, with the Telecom Security Bill going through the House at the moment. And then the third context is the Technical Director of GCHQ's public statements that it's impossible to assure Chinese-derived silicon technology, which was obviously going to be used in the generic design of the power station.
That's for me too.
Yeah, thanks, Anna.
Alan, that's for me. So ONR assess the cybersecurity. I have in my team, I have cybersecurity experts. And this is in this GDA, we have the new principles and technical assessment guides that we are using for this GDA covering cybersecurity. It's the first GDA because of the new security assessment principles in which we look at this aspect in such a detail. And we, as I said, we have our internal experts, but we also are in very close contact with the National Cybersecurity Center to ensure that we are at all times aware of what is relevant good practice. So obviously, I'm not expert in cybersecurity, but and something else I need to say, we have the cybersecurity experts and our instrumentation and control experts working together to making sure that we look at those instrumentation and control digital systems according to our technical assessment guides to make sure they are adequate and they meet our expectations. So just to give you some reassurance, yes, we do look at cybersecurity in GDA, but we look at the systems in their own merits. We look at the engineering of those systems by our experts in their own merit. Yeah.
So the technical director of GCHQ thinks it's too dangerous for me to ring my mother in Billericay, but you can build a nuclear power station 10 miles from my house. Have I answered that correctly?
So what I'm saying is that we use our safe security assessment principles and our technical assessment guides to look at the proposals from the requesting party, and we look at the cyber security aspects of that, and we look at those systems in their own merit by our own experts using the National Cyber Security Center advice on what is relevant good practice in these areas. But we look at the proposals put to us by the requesting party in their submissions to us. Yeah.
And how much that's made public? How much of that can we review?
So obviously there will be aspects that are sensitive nuclear information that we couldn't make public. So all the information that is been made public is already there by the requesting party in their website, and you will also see our step 4 assessment report on security that will describe what we've done and our conclusions. But of course, what we cannot put in the public domain is matters that are considered sensitive nuclear information.
Thank you both.
There was just a point, Peter, if I can pick it up, because I think you said, David, that you're building a power station, and I want to make clear, we're regulators, we are not the builders, we are not the constructors. We are independent of government, we are independent of industry, and we're really, we're very strong in that. It's really important to us.
And I just want to understand how you're doing the risk assessment piece for the generic design, because it might not be my mother you're building the power station, it might be somebody else's mother you're building the power station next to. Just a generic question for generic assessment.
Yeah, we're not the builders, was my key point.
Okay. Yeah, I get that.
So, David, if I may, one of the things I always, obviously because I'm not an expert, so if I tell you a lot of details, they are going to be wrong. It's not my area. But I always offer that for our biannual meetings with BANG, I'm pretty happy to bring my team specialists that can give you more details about how we go about doing this assessment.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
Louise, my dear friend, patiently waiting in Suffolk, please ask your question.
It's fine. It's been a really interesting evening. You can hear me, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Yes. Okay. Yes, it's been a very interesting meeting. Thank you very much. I put in a couple of questions earlier on. The first one was, I'll just read them both if I may, and then you can take them as needed. So in the 8 topics for assessment, particularly numbers 4 and 8, if I've understood it correctly, what are the sources of information? So universities, charities, research institutes, think tanks, etc., that are consulted with to arrive at estimates of damage to other animals, fish, mammals, insects, etc. I'm an East Suffolk councillor, I'm Labour Party, I'm implacably opposed to nuclear, so I should put my cards on the table right away, not just Sizewell C, but all of it, frankly. And we also have CFAS in Lowestoft. So I'm just wondering, which agencies are you working with to arrive at the non-human animal damage to? And then the second question, which is entirely separate, but another area of interest of mine, and that's to do with language. So in order to make consultations as inclusive as possible, how are what are called technically semantic barriers of jargon, specialist technical terminology addressed? So is there a team of language communication consultants within either the EA or the ONR? And I don't mean in terms of PR, I just mean in terms of making sure that it's really as plain English as it can be. Thank you.
So, Caroline, can I come to you for the second? Because I'm sure you want to talk about our work in plain English. And the first one, who are our experts? We have our own experts, and so we have a marine team, we have habitats regulation team, biodiversity teams within the Environment Agency who provide the advice and would seek advice from others where necessary. At the moment, we are doing some work. We were doing some work on determining the permit for a change at Hinkley Point C. That's a significant amount of work for us, and it's actually gone to appeal. So we are busy preparing for the appeal at the moment, and it is our experts. We seek additional advice, for example, from specialist consultancies where necessary. But we are always the intelligent customer for looking for advice and knowing whether the advice is right. So it's a wide range of inputs. We work closely with the DEFRA family organisations. So if I look at habitats regulations assessment, for example, Natural England is the body responsible in terms of protecting habitats, and so we work closely with them, as we do with the Marine Management Organisation. You asked about CFAS, and CFAS are another body of DEFRA, whose expertise is on fisheries and the like. They have two arms, one government, one commercial, who provide advice into the process for different people, and indeed, for NNB Genco in some cases. So it's a range is the answer to the first question, but I'm keen that we pick up, because Caroline's our expert on what we do to make sure that our documents are readable. Caroline.
Thank you.
Hi. The gov.uk, all of government has what they call a style guide, and it's to ensure that all government communications are written in a plain English way that people can understand. So if you go onto gov.uk, you can see and type in style guide. This will come up, and it will give you the background on how government communicators and reports and documents are expected to be presented and written. Also, when we produce our own nuclear documents, we work with plain English editors to, first of all, they go through the technical documents to ensure that they comply in a technical way with the style guide. But we also produce summary documents which are more suitable for the general public. I mean, this is a technical issue, and it is a challenge to make it accessible, but with the plain English public summaries, we do try and explain it in as most plain English way as we can without taking away the sort of the technical aspects. And we don't just do this on this topic, we do it on all of our nuclear regulation work, and this is across the EA and with other government departments. So yeah, we do use the style guide in plain English.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. I'm hoping this is a quick question for you from Julie Baker, please.
Thank you, Ellen. It's just the microsieverts part of your lecture. Can you explain, if it's being pumped into the sea, is there a collective repetitive power of the microsieverts? Will the people, after, I don't know, a year, will the oysters glow in the dark? That's what I want to say. Is there a collective repetitive power if you keep ploughing out microsieverts into the air and the sea? Thank you.
So Paula, do you want to pick that one up?
Okay, certainly. It's a really awkward unit. I don't think I could even begin to describe in really even what it considers a measure of energy transferred to a cell in a nutshell, but it's very, very complex. But in terms of a cumulative effect, which is I think what you were really worried about, in topic report 7, the radiological impact does look at a cumulative effect on the assessment. It looks at the cumulative impact on the sediments, and what you find is because radioactivity decays, it'll increase and then plateau off when input and decay sort of balance out. And that will vary depending on the element that's being discharged. So the graphs for cumulative effect are presented in the requesting parties chapter on dose impact, and I think there's certainly a comment on cumulative impact in the assessment report. It tends to plateau after about 10 to 30 years, but obviously that depends on the half-life of the activity. So yes, it's considered, and it's not considered to be an ongoing cumulative impact indefinitely. It does reach a level.
What would a dangerous level? Yeah, brilliant, thanks. What would a dangerous level be?
Again, it would very much depend on the type of element that's discharged and the habits of the person around. So the cumulative impact tends to be found in sediments offshore. So the actual exposure route is very, very small. So I don't think there is a threshold at which point, I think usually 1,000 microsieverts would be the public threshold.
So in radiological protection, there's a public dose limit, and which is 1,000 microsieverts per year. So you can, a microsievert is a millionth of a sievert, which tells you that a sievert's a very big unit. You know, it's like measuring. It's a difference between an inch, but I'm really old, and inches and miles. You know, it's a big unit, and so that's why we talk about microsieverts and the public dose limit being about 1,000. As Paula put the information, the public dose is 1,000, but as Paula put the slide up earlier, 2,500-ish is what people get because they live in the earth. If you live in a place which has got uranium in the rocks, like Cornwall, then you will get a higher dose because of the radon background, which is there, considerably higher. So there's a range of wherever different places where you live in the world. What we're talking about here is 23, if I remember right, microsieverts per year to the most exposed people. And the basis of radiological protection is that if you assess the dose for the most exposed people, everybody else gets less. And you can see then that 23 comparison to 1,000, it is small. It's only a fraction of the dose limit. That's the way the radiological protection system works. Plus, you get what I mentioned before, the use of BAT, best available techniques, to drive down discharges, to minimise the impact, and thereby to minimise the dose to people, radiation dose that people might be exposed to.
Thank you.
Technically, it is a measurement. So one analogy is to think of it as units of alcohol. So on some people, it's far worse effect than on others. And the cumulative effect of drinking lots of alcohol is worse. But exactly as Paula said, it can diminish over time. But it's a kind of a crossover between chemistry and physics. Right, Sophie, please. I know that you've been awaiting this moment in your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I have a couple of questions. Would you like me to put them both forward, or one is on the ISODAs and the other is about generic versus site-specific?
Okay, however you want to do it, Sophie.
Okie doke. Let's look at ISODAs. I'm sort of a little bit confused about not what they are, but this process where you've got 6 GDA issues identified, 40 other assessment findings that have to be addressed, and you'll only give the SODAs the statement of design acceptability when all that's been addressed and rectified. But in the meantime, an ISODA can be issued. That kind of indicates that there's an assumption that those issues are going to be addressed and resolved. But it says that if issues are not dealt with by the end of the GDA process, then you issue an ISODA. So it's kind of, what is the point of an ISODA, an interim SODA? is it not a soda by any other name? And you've got a draft iSoda included in the consultation document. So again, it seems there's a presumption of issuing one, even if the points are not properly addressed and resolved. So I would say surely if those issues are not resolved by the end of the GDA process, then surely you shouldn't issue either a soda or an iSoda.
So I'll pick that one up first, perhaps.
Yeah, do you want to take that first, and then if you want my next question, I'm quite happy to come back in.
Great. So we have decisions to make about whether we issue DAC and soda, IDAC and iSoda, or nothing, because we're not content with the design. And it's substantiation, what tells us what we assess as to whether it's safe, secure, and properly protects the environment. So when we carry out our assessments, we know the assessments we need to carry out. We carry out those assessments, but there are still some issues, like the ones we've identified in this consultation, which haven't been resolved. At the time when we wrote the consultation documents, those issues have not been resolved. If that was the end of the GDA, and the company provided us with resolution, requesting party rather, provided us with resolution plans which we thought credible. And what I mean by that is that if the actions taken in the resolution plans, we were content that if they were done properly, should resolve the issues, then that's when we would consider issuing an IDAC and iSoda. And what it in essence says is we've done our assessments, but these issues need to be resolved. We believe they're resolvable because these resolution plans that have been produced by the requesting party, we consider credible. And that could be the end of the GDA process. That would be the end, unless the requesting party comes back, as they did in the case of the UK EPR and in the case of the AP 1000 reactor design, but they came back. They resolved the issues by carrying out the resolution plans. We looked at what came out from those, from doing the work of the resolution plans, came to a view as to whether it was acceptable to resolve the issues, and issued a full DAC and soda. So the interim is a step along the path, but what it indicates is that for us, generic design assessment isn't complete. And if generic design assessment isn't complete, we don't think that the design is ready to be carried forward into construction. Work can go on alongside, but carried forward into construction before those issues are resolved. That's in essence what we are saying. Does that help to explain our process?
So an iSoda at the end of GDA process, not everything's quite as it should be, but you're happy that there was a bit of ifs, if they come back with this and it should be resolved by what they're saying. I don't like ifs and shoulds. Who is then on, continuing to monitor whether those proposals that should resolve things are actually carried through to a point where they get a soda? And are you saying that if they get iSodas at the end of GDA, are they then allowed to go to construction phase?
No,
they can't go to construction stage without full sodas on everything.
We would expect a DAC and soda because GDA could finish at the IDAC and iSoda stage if the design wasn't being taken forward, or as was in the case of the two cases, EPR and AP 1000, then the companies carried on. Westinghouse, after a pause, carried on resolving the issues. We look at what they are doing. We continue the GDA into another further step beyond step 3, 4 on the little graphic that I showed you before, into the GDA issue resolution step. And it's only if at the end of that we are satisfied that the work they have done to substantiate the resolution of the GDA issue is valid, if we agree with it, only then would we consider issuing the full DAC and soda. So it's a point along a path. Like I say, they could stop at that, that point if they want. But if they want to build in the UK, then we'd expect them to carry on and do that work, resolve the issues. Yeah, one of the reasons for generic design assessment isn't just about giving the UK regulators early influence on the design. For a developer, what they really don't want is to identify significant issues well into the construction period, because they're spending lots of money and it will cost a lot, potentially not just fixing it, but also just the costs of money. So they really want to know before they start construction that the design should be acceptable in the UK. I mean, that's where they want to be, because the project and cost risks associated with late identification of regulatory concerns can be really, really expensive, and that's been seen elsewhere. So that,
Can I add?
Anna, did you want to add
something? Yeah, I just wanted to add that this closure process of the GDA, the closure phase, is the same level of thorough assessment from the regulators. And at the end of it, we publish quite substantial assessment reports, one for each of the GDA issues. And you can look at our joint website, in which you can see our assessment reports that we publish for both the AP 1000 and the EPR. So you can see the level of assessment we have conducted in this closeout phase.
Okay. Sophie, can I just bypass your next question just to see if we really should wrap up soon? But
yeah, of course.
Asako, please ask your question.
Yeah, I just thought the construction process of nuclear power plant takes like sometimes decades, and I just wonder your assessment would take into consideration the environmental impact caused by climate change, for example, excessive raining or groundwater level or coastal erosion, because it will have a definite impact on UK coastal geography. Thank you.
Anna, do you want to deal with that one?
So in the from the point of view of safety, the requesting party has to tell us what events, external events, so external hazards could happen in this genetic site of their submission. Is the genetic site envelope from the point of view of the external hazards. So they obviously they have to look at they have to design the plan for these external hazards, which are very, very extreme, with a very, very low frequency of 1 in 10,000 years, and that it has to be evaluated in a conservative fashion. So it's very extreme events. Then we also, they also need to look at cliff edge, which is if the hazard gets a little bit worse, is the risk increasing a lot? And on top of that, they have to look at the predictions on climate change. So this GDA started in between the previous predictions 2009 and the more recent 2018, but what we so they looked at the previous predictions on climate change to make sure the plan they are taken into consideration in the design and the safety analysis. And in step 4, which is where we are now, we expect them to look at the latest predictions and look at the gap and design the plan taking into consideration climate change. So it's a bit lengthy answer, but the answer is yes. Yes.
And I think, Anna, we should also mention the periodic safety review and the periodic review of permits. For if permits and the nuclear site license and construction went ahead for any site, then it isn't a case of a regulation is static. It learns, and there's a requirement for organisations to review. Anna?
Yes, so once the plant is constructed, they need to reassess the safety against the latest standards and the latest predictions on climate change every 10 years, and they have to improve the design and make all those reasonably practicable improvements to demonstrate that the risk of the design continues being as low as reasonably practicable, which is the legal requirement in the UK.
Thank you. Right, this is the last question, and I'm so pleased Vary has been so patient, but if you would like to ask your question, and then after that, perhaps, Andy, you would just like to wrap up briefly so that we can bid everybody farewell into the dark night before the storms come tomorrow. Thank you.
I've got two questions here, so I'll ask the first one, see how we get on. I'm just wondering how the Environment Agency assesses the public's interest in the project, if they assess the public's interest from the number of responses they receive to the consultation. Because as I've said to the Environment Agency before, it's difficult to see how the public can get engaged in what they admit is a technical consultation. So I feel it's important to know what store you set by the number of responses you receive.
So, yeah, thanks for that,
for
Barry.
example, you say, oh, the public's not really very interested. They haven't bothered to, so, they're quite happy if this goes ahead.
No, what I usually say about our consultations is that, our consultations, it's not a democratic process. It's not about voting yay or nay, aye or nay, and coming to a view. It's the process of a democracy, I think, is the way I'd describe it. Because what we are interested in is the issues that are raised. So it's not a numbers game about how many receive. It's about what are the issues. That's the questions that we are asking, and that's why it's so important. The issues which can be raised clearly relevant to our decision making and generic design assessment. That's what we want to listen to and want to hear. We've had issues raised during our public meetings, ranging from what the implications are in terms of those to the standards that are required on management systems as part of GDA. And so, these are quite technical issues, but people are able to talk about them, and we really appreciate it. So don't think that if it's a low response, we think there's no interest. It's what the responses are saying that's more important to us.
Thanks. Have I got time for the next one?
I'm fine.
Well,
It is 9:30. Is it a short and quick, punchy question, Mary?
Well, it seems like a long time ago in the meeting, but we were told that for the purposes of the GDA, accounts taken of the nearest occupied building 100 meters from the site, but that's actually talking about a building that's going to be very close to working reactors and what is known as the interim radioactive waste store, which includes spent fuel. And it's not interim, and I think it's time that we stop using the word interim. It's long term. The wastes are going to remain on the site until around the middle to the end of the next century. And the other thing is, how can the Environment Agency possibly know that it's going to be safe to store waste there for that period of time? Wouldn't it be a lot better if they told the government that either they hope or they pray that that's going to be the case, or that they simply don't know, and that any approval they give has got to be provisional?
So I think, Paula, if I come to you in the 100-meter occupied building assumption, and then Anna about safety storage of waste. Is that okay?
Okay.
I think it's two. I think you sneaked in two questions. Very well done. Yeah.
I did, yeah.
In terms of the 100 metre from the site, it is a distance that's assumed to be as close as would be expected. And the reason we do that is because it takes into account shine from the reactor. So it takes into account direct radiation, as well as discharges that you would inhale or come into contact with from the ground, and also your food and water intake. So the distance is purely about how close you are to the plume and how close you are to direct radiation. So it's a conservative assumption. It's just a way we ensure that we are taking a bounding case for the dose. The interim store, do you want to take, Alan? Because that's a policy assumption.
Well, the interim store is government's base case for how radioactive waste should be managed. And that waste would be stored until such time as a geological disposal facility was available so was in existence and was available for use by a site in the future, which would be a combination of factors to take into account. The regulator for storage of radioactive waste on site is safety is ONR. Anna, did you want to conclude it with a few words?
All right. So I know I won't say a lot, but the interim fuel storage facility that is being presented to us is a conceptual design. Dry storage is a conceptual design, but we still need them to evaluate what can go wrong, what is there to mitigate, and therefore the risk associated to this storage facility. And in fact, we issued regulatory observation number 50, which is published in our joint website, that you can see all the specific questions we asked about the interim fuel storage facility, that their safety case needs to provide the answers. Currently, we are assessing the responses that the requesting party is giving it to us. So in what we told them that they have to give us a risk assessment, but because it's a conceptual design, it will not be a very detailed risk assessment taking into consideration, of course, it will take consideration the generic side, but it won't be very detailed. However, that is not the end of the road, because at the time before this interim fuel storage facility is built in the future, if it's ever built in the future, then it will be regulation. They will have to have a detailed safety case for the detailed design with a detailed risk assessment, in which they will tell us what is the risk of this facility in terms of risk to the public, and taken into consideration the population distributed around the site. So even though now we're looking at it at conceptual level, later on, if it's ever built, we'll do another detailed assessment with the detailed design and the detailed risk assessment before obviously this facility can be put in place, can start being used. Yeah, I think that is probably enough. I'm not sure I answered your question, but
well, thanks for trying.
And yeah, that's it.
I think interim is a misnomer.
Yeah. Okay.
Interim is between, because the fuel, when it's taken from the reactor, is put in the spent fuel pool, and it stays some years there, and then is put in this facility, and that's why it's called interim, before for a number of years, again many years, before it's taken to the GDF. That's the name.
Yeah.
And I think what you're alluding to, Barry, is that because we don't have a geological disposal facility now, is this not the permanent disposal facility? And that is not what policy says, because we will need a geological disposal facility whether a new build proceeds or not, because for the existing waste. So I mean that's where we are. So it is not intended. That's why it's an interim facility, so that the waste can be disposed of in the geological disposal facility.
It is also going to have to remain on the site for quite a long time just to cool down before it can be removed. And it's
That's right.
a different kettle of nuclear from Bradwell, for example.
Yeah, very different fuel to Bradwell.
Thank you, folks. And this is an excellent time to hand over to Andy, because I'm sure everyone appreciates how well versed he is on the whole issue of nuclear legacy and nuclear waste. So Andy, if you just can address that little point and that huge point and the unknowns there, and then I will just close after that. Thank you. You've just muted yourself, Andy. You were unmuted.
I really don't want to address that last point. It made me so uncomfortable and angry listening to the discussion that I hardly know where to begin. But I'm very much hoping some of the people here tonight will respond to the to this consultation as vigorously as they can. And I really I don't want to say anything about the far future. There's no way you can regulate the far future, and it is completely foolish for the EA and the ONR to suggest that you can, and that the government's got everything in hand. We don't believe that. We know it's not the case, and that is a central reason why new build in any form should not come forth. However, that is a debate that we can have long and loud on many occasions. I just wanted to say how pleased I've been to listen to the responses from the members of, well, we're calling them the public, but those people that turned up. There's been some quite high level discussion, in my view, much of it very interesting. The problem is how to connect. And the difficulty is that the language, however much the EA are being told by the civil service, this is your language guide and so on, I think you have to say that the documents that were before us are pretty inaccessible. They're inaccessible partly because of the language in which they're written, but also because they are technical documents and therefore difficult. And I think people have struggled, and they've really got on top of this stuff. But there is a need to connect, and I just feel that there's not a connection. And I'd like to address the EA, and thank you very much, the EA, for coming along. I mean, we are grateful for the time that you give. Don't get me wrong. However, I hope you have listened, but also heard. And I would ask you to be bold and not defensive, and to be brave. Why can't you say to government, this is a nonsense? These assumptions are foolish. There's no way this this project can really take place here and last for 150, 200 years. It's self-evident, obvious to everybody, and yet somehow I believe you're doing a sort of cover-up job. And what this really is about is facilitating the Chinese to get their reactor with a GDA permission. It may not come to Bradwell. I think there's been enough said tonight to suggest that it can't come to Bradwell, and even the EA in their other guises would not allow it. So my message is thank you very much, everybody. I think it's been a very good evening to listen to, and I don't often listen very much, so I've been pleased about that. I just say to the EA, I hope you will respond and not spend all the time thinking, how can we deflect that one? How can we say that wasn't right, and so on? Welcome what people are saying and give a constructive response, and sometimes react in a positive way. I think we'd be very pleased if that was the outcome of this consultation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. And again, I'd just like to reiterate our thanks, BANG, to you guys that have agreed to come to an away match and on our terms. So thank you, Alan. Well, I won't go through you, but Alan, Anna, Caroline and Paula, wherever you are, yes, I can see you. And thank you to everyone that rocked up today. And again, as Andy said, your questions were fantastic. stick with it and keep the faith and keep safe in these strange times. Love you lots. See you soon.
Thanks very much. And
Thank you
good
very
night.
much, everyone. Thank you. Good night.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Let's have a look. Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah, I don't know how long those things stay.
Oh God, it's still going.